this isn't really working out. I think the best thing for all parties moving forward is for us to part ways. Consider this my formal notice.
Screw you, screw your game, and screw your hardcore death rules.
Or just silence, an empty seat with no player in it, a complete and total ghosting. They were in your game one moment, and then they just disappear off the face of the earth. Anyone who's been a dungeon master for any length of time has had players leave their games, sometimes amicably, and sometimes not. But it happens to the best of us. So what we're talking about today are the various reasons why players might leave your game, along with suggestions for what you might do about it, ideally before they actually leave. Number 1, logistical issues. Scheduling. Let's just get this out of the way. Scheduling is the number 1 game killer. The number 1 reason you're gonna lose players. If your game is at a time that just doesn't work for a player, they're out. It's as simple as that. But that's not usually how you lose players. Generally speaking, the group agrees upon a time that will work for everyone. And then things just keep coming up where one player here and there just can't make a game session. And if the group isn't willing to keep playing when a player can't make a game session, you tend to fall into a scheduling spiral of death where you are constantly skipping sessions or rescheduling, and eventually it becomes an absolute nightmare. Players might get fed up over it and look for other consistent groups that they can play in. And in the worst case scenario, the entire group fizzles. The single best thing you can do is to play as long as you have at least 3 or 4 players who can make a game session. This avoids the entire death spiral and actually encourages players to make the game because they know that they'll miss out if they don't. Having a reoccurring schedule on the same day and time every week or 2 weeks is the other key solution to avoiding this problem. Next, set expectations. This is something you'll usually do in session 0 as a conversation with your players. You want to set the expectations on a variety of things. The game schedule, obviously. What happens to a player's character when they aren't at a game session? What kind of game are you running? What types of content are off limits in the group? What kind of content do people want to see? Are we following the rules as written, or are there house rules we'll be using? How do we handle rules discussions or arguments? What do we do if there's a problem during the game? When you don't set these expectations and you aren't all on the same page, it can lead to conflicts that might cause someone to leave your game. Number 2, game master issues. Yeah, this is where it's your fault. I think it's easy for us to sometimes blame all the problems in our games on the players, but it's also important for game masters to own up to the crap they bring to the table that causes players to nope out. Now, I'm not going to give you a master list of all of the dysfunctional GM issues that exist because, frankly, I've spoken about many of them before, and there are actual D&D channels completely devoted to horror stories, many of them about game masters. However, here are some of the big ones that can drive players away: removing player agency, railroading, allowing toxic behavior, or being the one displaying toxic behavior, the so-called GM versus player mentality, favoritism, using GM PCs, the GM telling a story instead of running a game, and lack of commitment from the GM. The latter, lack of GM commitment, usually manifests in the form of not preparing adequately for the game. Of course, most GMs won't admit to this. Instead, they'll just justify their lack of preparation with trite sayings such as, "the best laid plans of mice and GMs oft go awry," or "no plan survives first contact with the players." Of course, players often throw wrenches in the plan, but the more prepared you are, the better you'll be able to react to those wrenches. I have a saying: you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your highest level of preparation. However, I believe that there is a game master issue that doesn't get enough press, probably because people just don't feel comfortable talking about it. And that's that your game just might not be that good. 4+ hours for a game session once a week or twice a month is a big time commitment. And folks are only gonna do that if they're enjoying the game. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into a game being fun and enjoyable. And yes, the players contribute to this in a large way. But we cannot ignore the fact that perhaps the largest factor in a good game is the Dungeon Master. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel bad by telling you this. I'm not trying to browbeat you and tell you that it's your fault. And we certainly can't ignore the fact that what constitutes a good game is subjective. What I think is a good game, someone else will hate, and vice versa. But my point is this. As a game master, you should be committed to improving your game little by little. Each time you prepare an adventure, each time you run a game session, the better you can make your games, the more likely everyone will enjoy themselves and your players will stick around. And the good news is that there are tons of resources out there for GMs to learn from. Obviously, my channel is filled with GM advice on a variety of topics, and my team and I are publishing The Secret Art of Game Mastery. But there are other amazing resources out there, such as this book, So You Want to Be a Game Master by Justin Alexander, which I'm personally reading right now, and learning a lot from, by the way. And I have another one for you. I also think Arbiter of Worlds has a lot of good information in it as well. So the resources are out there, you just need to behoove yourself of them. Now, if you're a new game master, one of the biggest challenges you face is designing the adventures you'll be running for your players. After all, what makes a good adventure? And how can you be sure that your adventures will be enjoyable for your players? Now, I have tons of content on my channel here about how to design adventures, and you can check those videos out. However, if you're looking for professionally designed 5th edition or Pathfinder 2 adventures that you can drag and drop into your games, my team and I create Lair magazine for just that reason. DM Lair adventures come with everything you need. Read aloud text for areas, role-playing notes, encounter notes, NPC information, digital maps for online play, the whole shebang. So if you're looking to take some of the confusion out of game prep and better ensure that you'll run games your players will love, head over to thedmlair.com and check out Lair magazine. You can browse through all the back issues to find exactly what you need, or sign up for a subscription and get a new issue every month. Now, I think one of the best ways you can work to improve your game is by gathering feedback from your players. Every 3 months, I send my players a survey that asks them 3 questions. 1, rate this game from 1 to 5. 2, what is something about the game you enjoy that I should keep doing? 3, what is something you dislike that I should stop doing? 4, what is something that I should start doing? And then I evaluate the feedback, often talk to the group about certain points, and work to improve in any areas that I need to grow in. However, you can also evaluate your own behavior and game sessions. After each session, think back on the game. Were your players smiling, laughing, having fun, or were they bored? How well do you think you did? Were you prepared? What could you do better in the future? Number 3, common game issues. Sure, why not? Let's go over some of the most common issues games typically have. A game is too easy or too difficult. Some players like beer and pretzel games, where they take names and kick butt and cakewalk the bosses. Others prefer to be challenged. Clearly, you can talk to your players to see what they prefer, but you'll probably find that you have a variety of preferences in your group. Thus, I've found that the best solution is simply to have a variety of difficulties in your encounters and adventures. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes middle road, sometimes downright hard. Too many players. Guys, I'm telling you, it might be exciting when you have like 12 players who want to play D&D and you're like, this is amazing. I need to buy a bigger table. But experientially, most large groups suffer from a variety of problems, chief of which is bog. And by this I mean that everything takes forever. Gameplay is slow, especially combat. Decision making is practically impossible, and players often find themselves waiting forever to participate because there are just so many people playing. This can lead to a boring game where players lose interest. Now, the good news, kind of, is that this could lead to players leaving the game, reducing the headcount, and thus improving the game. Except that you could have players you really like leave, and other players that you wish would leave stay instead. Next, constant rules arguments. Sometimes this is rooted in the dungeon master just not knowing the rules, and other times it's rules lawyers who just want to get their way. Regardless, arguing over the rules constantly can make any game miserable. My house rule is this: I may solicit, and often do, feedback from players on a ruling and consider what they have to say, but once I make a decision, we need to abide by it and let the matter drop so that we can get on with playing the game. Next, we have ignoring certain pillars of the game. There are 3 pillars in an RPG: combat, exploration, and social interactions. Now, people often refer to the last one as role-playing, even though the entire game is role-playing, but I'm not gonna rant about that today. I promise I'm going to control myself. The thing is, when you don't include all the pillars, your game just isn't going to be as interesting and fun as it could be, and it won't appeal to a variety of play styles and preferences, which you're likely going to have represented among your players. Now, if you want to learn more about the 3 pillars, check out my video titled The 3 Pillars of a Successful D&D Game. And then we have long combat slogs. Now, to be clear, that a combat takes a long time does not mean that it's a bad combat. I routinely have combats in my high-level D&D game that I run for patrons last like 2 or 3 hours, usually boss fights, and the players tell me that they are really enjoying them. So a long combat does not a slog make. Instead, a slog is a combat that is both long and boring. To overcome this, you can do 2 things. Try to make combats faster, though that isn't always possible. And then of course you can make your combats more interesting. Discussing that is outside the scope of this video, but my channel has several videos on it about improving combat that you can check out. The final most common game issue, in my opinion, is simple difference in preferred game styles. Now, to a certain extent, you as the game master can tailor your game so that it appeals to a variety of playstyles, and that's exactly what I try to do in my games. However, if there is a fundamental disconnect on game style, some players won't enjoy the game as much as they otherwise might, and they might leave. For instance, you may prefer to run a gritty game where death is always waiting around the corner, but some players may prefer the happy, fluffy, fey unicorn bunnies game where no one ever dies. Neither one is right or wrong. It's 100% a matter of preference. Now, unfortunately, there may not be too much you can do about differences like this, except wish them the best and hope they find a game that suits their tastes. My personal take on this is that you, as the game master, should run a game that excites you, and find players that also want to play that game. It shouldn't be too hard. Game masters are in short supply and players are a dime a dozen. Now, if you have a particular group of friends you really want to play with, sure, you may make some concessions to make sure the game is enjoyable for them, but you don't completely compromise to the point where you as the GM don't like the game. At that point, your game will probably be doomed to failure. Game mastering is a labor of love, and if you aren't enjoying it, the game is going to suffer. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with your fellow game masters. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel and you made it this far in my video, why don't you just subscribe too? I mean, I'll know if you don't. Number 4, player conflicts. These are conflicts that occur directly between players themselves. A typical conflict that you're going to run across is players who can't agree on what they want from the game. For instance, you could have a murder hobo who wants to kill everything in their path, and another player who loves acting in character and wants to converse with everything. These 2 players are quite likely going to butt heads, and if they don't find a way to accommodate what each other wants from the game, there's going to be disagreements, arguments, and elevated feelings. Yes, this is similar to players having different play styles, but the distinction is that the difference leads to direct conflict. The next source of player conflict is when one player steps on another player's fun. This can happen when a player is taking the game too seriously, or when they aren't taking the game seriously enough. Or it might be a rules lawyer who gets bent out of shape when the game master is attempting to make an exception to the rules to allow another player to do something cool in the game. And then you have selfish players who hog the limelight and essentially don't allow other players to play the game much. Or the lone wolf players who refuse to stick with the party and de facto force the game master to run 2 games simultaneously, which results in more work for the GM and less playtime for the rest of players, and for them too. Finally, cheating can result in some heated player conflict. So what's the solution? Well, no matter what the permutation of direct player conflict is, the steps a game master should take are fairly universal, and they involve doing what most folks are loath to do: talking to the people involved in the conflict and trying to resolve the issue. Now, in some cases, it will be clear which player is the source of the conflict, such as cheating or rules lawyer, and you can have a conversation privately with them. Explain what the situation is, explain how it's making others feel, and ultimately request that the behavior be changed. Now, you want this to be a conversation where you can get their version of events or their point of view on things. You don't just want to sit there and rattle off a list of issues and then order a change. That probably won't go over too well. Now, in the cases where the issue involves more than one player, it may make sense to talk to everyone involved all at once. That way you can facilitate a conversation with all and guide things to a resolution that everyone is satisfied with. Of course, in some cases, it might make sense to talk to the entire group about what's going on. And an important point here, try to get to the root of whatever issue you're dealing with. Remember that the actual issue you're seeing may be caused by something else. And if that something else, that root cause, isn't dealt with, the issue may persist. Or even if it goes away, another issue may arise because the root cause is still there. For instance, I once had a player who loved waking up other rooms in a dungeon when the group was already in a combat, which often added more combatants and made things harder or even deadly. Now, I still don't know for certain why he was doing that, but my friend Joe came to me one day and gave me his theory. And it was his way of punishing everyone else. Because here's the thing, if you do nothing, the cost of doing nothing could be that one of the players involved in the conflict leaves your group. And frankly, the chances are high that the player causing the issues won't be the one to leave. No, the other player will. And then you're left with a player still causing problems and potentially driving away other players. No. Fellow Game Master, it is imperative that you take action before things go sideways and your group begins falling apart. Number 5, interpersonal issues. Next, we have a variety of interpersonal issues that may rear their heads and cause conflict at the table. You could have basic personality conflicts, age or generational differences, a falling out between friends, or couples drama. That is a real fun one to deal with right there. You could have drunk or high players, people who show a lack of respect, a manifestation of isms such as sexism or racism, or hygiene issues. Hygiene issues are not fun to deal with. Like, that's super uncomfortable to talk about. Yeah. Now, though any of these are challenging and sometimes very awkward to deal with, the good news is that the basic approach is the same as dealing with player conflicts. Talking with people. And it also helps set expectations for the group. And again, this can be done at your session 0. Or if it's something that comes up in the middle of the campaign, do it at your next game session. Can you imagine that conversation? Like, you want to set expectations on personal hygiene and you're like at a game session, you're like, okay guys, we need to talk about something. Just to set some expectations here. Like, let's talk about personal hygiene. We need to make sure that everyone comes to the game having bathed and ideally used some sort of deodorant or perfume of some sort. And if we could all just kind of make sure we're doing that, that would be just great. It's like super awkward. Wow. But you might have to do that someday. If you have done that, let me know in the comments. I would love to know. Remember, no matter what you do, players will sometimes leave. It may be your fault and it may not. However, whenever possible, try to understand why the player left. And if there is something you can do to improve, do so. And remember, if you're looking for professionally designed 5e and Pathfinder 2 adventures, monsters, traps, puzzles, and more, check out Lair magazine over on thedmlair.com. Now, if you'd like to learn some of the best ways to find new players for your group, check out this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering.